Okay, so they're doing a lot of dredging on the bottom of the ocean, on the sea there, and that's a lot of drowned land there. That's not very deep. Do you know of any artifacts that they dredge up, like mastodon bones or, ivory or human artifacts, maybe? Because
Actually, yes.
this area is part of that sunken land of the continental shelf, right? That is very shallow, just like in the North Sea where I live. So I could imagine, you could ask around there what you can find in that area. And I'd be keen to hear that.
Welcome to the November 6th edition of The Electric View. I'm Neil Thompson. Today we have Jen, Edwin, Heather, Buddy, Robert, and David. We are discussing the evidence of catastrophism, the way that electrically charged bodies have interacted with us in human memory, and extrapolating the way that these forces change landscapes. Please like and subscribe below.
Well, just recently down the road in Fredericton, in the middle of the province, there was I think it was 14,000-year-old thing that was found, a settlement that was found by road workers.
14,000.
We also have just up north. There's some evidence that the Vikings actually made it to Nova Scotia. So that would have been the craziest of crazies, of course, because
they were Greenland, so it's just up further.
Well, they made it to Newfoundland for sure. There's actually lots of Viking longhouses that we've excavated. Which is they were all sod houses, but they chopped down the trees they found and put up, and they built them low and put like into the dirt, so that they were inside like a bowl, because the wind would go over top of them, and because there was obviously a lot of wind coming right off the ocean there. It's very much like Ireland in that sense. There's a big connection between that. There's a big feeling between Nova Scotia and like Scotland. They almost feel like the same in many cases. Beautiful valleys and such.
This settlement of 14,000 years, can we find anything on that topic? That would be interesting to hear, because that would be pre-Cataclysm, right?
Oh yeah, let me see if I can. It just recently got found. Let me see if I can locate it. But just as evidence, we do find things all the time. Usually we're surprised at the size of some giant lobster we pulled up, but, you never know. Let's see.
Payafandi discoveries?
Oh, yeah, well, some of these things are, when the tide is changing, there's some rivers that totally reverse themselves too, so... And there's a place called Reversing Falls, where if you ever drove through it while it was reversing, you're going to die unless it's an inflatable boat, because it'll get sucked right into that hole, like into a whirlpool. And the Joggins Fossil Cliffs is another famous place where the water has worn out these things, and you can find fossils just along this whole coast. So. Just on the other side that's like an hour away tops from me.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Oh, they have a store.
Well, of course they have a store. That's the only way that
just keep
things going.
Merchandise.
Swag, bitches. Yeah, but no, they obviously, this is what they find in those cliffs.
Those are beautiful.
And you can just pull them out of the rock. Like if you just went down
What
there,
are they?
A lot of them are supposed to be trilobites and other things like that, like from there's some footprints in the mud, so, and of course the tribute to Darwin,
of course,
but we don't really know how old these cliffs are. One of the cool things about them is it's one of those places where you can see the trees snapped off at a certain height. Those are the biggest evidence of cataclysm that we have, is because a tree was sitting there, it got buried to a certain point, and then a blast wave came flying above it that snapped the tree off at a certain, like 5 feet up. Now that means that all of these layers had to happen on the same day. You know what I mean? At least those 5 feet, because the tree didn't get buried over several millions of years. It wouldn't have worked that way, right?
I'm very much leaning towards that position for myself, very much.
So yeah, this is one of those things. It's and of course you have to intentionally not see that. You really have to pretend not to see. But these people are these cliffs are like just filled with I would assume loose debris that came in on this angle. If you see how I mean, like it came in on that angle across this flat surface and got welded there like welded tuft. And so this would be the debris that was blasted from, like, the American Southwest or something. Who knows how far away it came. Because our entire landscape here is buried and stuff. Like, we have layers and layers of material that has fallen across this land.
It looked like a mastodon tooth about 25 seconds ago.
It totally explains it because, we have a layer of a certain age, right? The carbon, for example. And then you have that sudden next layer, which is often devoid of any traces of life, and especially not the ones below it, right?
Yeah.
And then in between, we find that little dust layer with iridium and yada yada yada. I mean, this totally testifies. Yeah, this does not testify of a meteorite impact. I mean, how many places in the Earth are explained now by a mysterious meteorite impact, right?
Yeah.
That's a whole bunch of them already.
Not a fan of that.
Raining stones every day. But
I think it was way back when, but
it's an electric phenomenon. The only thing that most people, I think, also don't understand is the electricity comes from below, and it eats its way up.
Yep.
I guess it really at the end of the day, though, it really doesn't matter which direction, as long as we know that there is.
So you get zapped anyhow, right? But
I just mean that if you're coming in from space and you're entering, I mean, we know, just me and you, and everyone here probably knows, that it's not the friction of air molecules that cause these things to explode. These things are exploding long before they hit the air. I mean, we can see them as they come in across the sky and they zoom in towards the Earth. They have to be, they disappear as soon as they cross into areas of increasing charge, and they just pop. Now, if they're large enough, they can get closer to the Earth, but that's it. Almost nothing hits the ground. I mean, unless it's neutral.
I never bought the exploding part, because how can a large chunk of even ice or metal or rock, but even ice, how can it explode when the friction on the front is too high, so it starts melting there?
Yeah.
I don't see how the whole thing can suddenly blow up.
Oh,
I've never seen that.
I can tell you how.
Well, no, yeah, please do, but not in the conventional explanation, right?
No. It's totally electric. Basically, what you have is, you've heard of electrical fissioning as Don Scott described it. I'm not sure if you have or not, but his idea was to explain how a star would have to break into multiple spheres, because at a certain point the electrical potential on surface was so high that it will cause eventually the positive core will touch the negative surface. Once that happens, the entire thing is going to, all electrons are going to rush to that point, and it's going to barf out some material. It's going to increase its surface area, basically, so it can process more electrons. Now,
is that a solar flare?
Well, it would have been a supernova if it actually happened.
Okay.
But if we're looking at a smaller event, keep that in mind then, as this body is a different charge of the Earth, getting closer and closer to the negative surface. A whole whack of electrons are going to rush around, or protons are going to rush around this thing, forming a coma. Now, the middle of it is going to be a positive charge, and it's going to have a negative spin. Okay, so this, as now you have basically layers of capacitance, 3 of them to be specific, put together. As more and more charge builds up on that surface, the charge on the inside must also increase to balance, and it continues to get closer and closer to that surface. Now, this surface is not round; it's actually kind of a rock of indeterminate shape. Now, as this rock comes in, it's going to have high points. As soon as one of those high points, it has a connection with the positive core of this particular body, it's going to explode into little tiny chunks. And that's exactly what happens.
Vaporized.
It vaporizes
the electricity.
Itself. Yeah, because it's going to basically all the electrons are going to rush to this point. You have a short circuit basically, and all the potential of those capacitors are now going to be expressed on that point. And there's going to be nothing left. It's going to try to increase its surface area as it keeps going down. And to do that, it has to separate itself into finer and finer materials. So it's going to keep doing that, just like we saw in those experiments with David's work, where he's showing how a piece was taken off the piece of clay and just immediately, so quickly, turned to dust. You couldn't even see it anymore. It's gone. Well, that's the same thing as it's going to have happened to this asteroid as it goes through deeper and deeper layers of charge. Now, if it's a neutral ball, if it came from the Earth, for example, thrown in the air, and then it can come back down on land because there's no charge difference. So this is what keeps things like the space shuttle from exploding every single time it goes up into space. It's not going to do it every time. But from things like a comet is especially not balanced for us. Asteroids, they're going to only light up when they go through the ionosphere, basically. But a comet is lighting up in the sun. Like it's that charge that the sun itself is causing it to light up. So if something like that came in, it's going to have a much higher electrical potential. Therefore, it's going to have more charge. Therefore, it's going to explode with the force of 20 megatons of nuclear bombs. It's not going to, that's what happened in Tunguska and things like the Chicago fire and stuff like that. Because I think those were probably comets. But meteorites they're much smaller. They're not going to have as much charge.
So I can see the one in Tunguska just exploding just before it hit the ground and therefore having a large impact, for example. And I can also understand now that if it's big enough that you might hear multiple explosions in short succession.
Yeah, in fact, you saw that with that 2013 Russia meteor. It went pow, 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 pow. Because there was the main one that shocked it, and then as it came down, these chunks still had charge in them, and they were like pow.
Tunguska, with a K.
Yes.
Sorry.
There's a pretty good talk on that on Thunderbolts too, but they're not sure where that's the pictures that.
So that current barrier, if you will, on our Earth is probably, I imagine, the layer at about 100 kilometers, right?
Starting there and working its way down. Yeah.
I mean, above it, I would imagine that's true outer space for us in the sense that that's where the charge is.
Well, we 2 days prior to the explosion of Tunguska in 1908, there was huge auroras all over the Earth. So it was interacting with the magnetosphere as it passed into it for 2 days until finally it hit the Earth. And when it did, it only got about 7 miles. It was so highly charged. Apparently, it was like a pillar of fire in the sky with a beard coming down of lightning bolts. And one of those would be instigating obvious leaders coming up from the ground trying to reach towards it. And once they make contact with each other...
Would there be like an ion trail left behind? That's the pillar or something?
Well, it was the ion. There would have been obviously an ion trail because there was been particulate matter coming off of it. But what I meant was that this ball was so highly charged that it literally had lightning bolts coming off of it, reaching towards the ground. So it was that type of, and that's a description from the other people. They thought it was the return of Adi, their god. And that's what I heard from.
So what you're saying, the voltage potential was so high that when it came close enough, it caused a lightning discharge.
Yeah, and those would have been coming from the coma around it, actually, not necessarily the item itself, but the same result. It would have exploded the moment they made contact, or if it might have exploded even as it continued down to a certain point. It was just so highly charged, it was attracting charge directly to the Earth. That's how much charge there was. And if you just think about that, just rationally, how much electricity would be generated just in the lightning bolts alone, that means that object still had more than that. And when it exploded 20, 30 megatons, yeah, that makes sense. You don't have to, you can understand it. There was no friction heat up. There was just literally that much electrical potential between these two plates. And it just popped. And once it goes, it goes.
Have they done I'm sure it's been done, but is it available, like the geological or chemical analysis of this material.
It's really important to note that when they got there, it was 21 years later or 26 years later. I'm not sure.
Huh.
The guy who went there was Elvik or Kelvik or something. He brought his daughter. I don't even know why. And he had a 20-man team and everything to go explore this. Remember, at 1908, just shortly thereafter, there was the Bolshevik Revolution. So there was a whole whack of universities had to get back to working status, and then they finally decided to go send someone out to take a look, and that was their attempt. But even when he went, those black and white photos are his photos from that event, and this is what he saw when he went there: just trees just broken over, gone.
What was that? I got that for Red Room. Happened. What was the date on that?
I think it was 1913.
Okay.
I'm just guessing.
Execution.
Oh,
that
no,
was
I was wrong.
That was 1918. It was that late. It was that late. Okay, so it was after they got.
But yeah, apparently the first investigation of Tunguska was 20 some odd years later. So, and his name was like Kelvik or something, or Kelvig.
Okay.
And he was, and it was like the story of him going there. And if you actually read everything that was his thing, he talked to a bunch of people as he was going up these rivers to get there. And the only way he knew where it was by asking people where it was. Like they were pointing, yeah, over there. And that's what he eventually found it.
So it's saying it's a comet here.
Yeah, well, that's the end result, of course, in our world is that comets and asteroids are the same thing. The only difference is their potential energy. Like, whether or not even if it's balanced for near the sun or balanced away from the sun. If it's balanced for near the sun, it's not going to be nearly as dangerous to us. It won't explode with as much force when it gets close to us, which also implies, of course, that the Earth has natural defense mechanisms to keep itself from dying, basically. We have a thick atmosphere, especially under 1 mile. We have the ability to blow up asteroids and stuff as they get close to us, causing at most regional devastation instead of worldwide calamities. So there's some nice things about living on this rock.
What if the pyramids? What if the pyramids were to create the atmosphere?
That's and actually a theory.
That's a crazy one.
Well, one of them is that would this create the correct vibrations to make life bloom, or were they ways of protecting against these strikes? Because the atmosphere might have been highly electric at the time, and it was if things came in, they could discharge to certain points. Now they could discharge to the pyramids. That's an interesting idea. Kulik, that's his name. Mm-hmm. So yeah. So yeah, he went up there and they were talking. Everyone had a story about what happened the day that happened. Like no one would forget it. It blew people off their feet. He realized that it was so explosive that it had an EMP effect because people were hearing the comet as it was coming in. They were hearing the fluctuations as it was pulsing with the light, and the sound was in tune with the light. So that means they were hearing it locally, like from the electrical pulses generated from it were making the rocks around them vibrate, so they could hear it, even though it was 20, 30 miles away. There's no possible way for the sound to get to them at that distance, So, yeah, it was amazing. It was pretty intense. So that, and these are things that you have to look for in the descriptions of his actual work, because they don't put it here because it seems to violate the laws of physics, right? So,
right.
But, if you think about it as an electrical discharge, and you think about the rocks, all the every piece of granite in the ground just going, just sort of pulsing slightly, resonating with this thing coming in. It makes sense, but this is, I give them credit for getting this far, And there's been events like that. Another one was. Another one was called Bell Island, Newfoundland. I don't know.
Some swirling going on there.
I can't tell you what that is. I don't know what that is.
Yeah.
So this lack of charge that a asteroid or comet has before it comes into Earth, what does that do to that object, Neil?
Well, you can only have as much charge as you have potential difference between 2 points. So,
well, in the description, they are kind of like monocharges, monopoles.
Of course, they are.
Because
yes.
they are differently charged.
Yes. But they form layers around themselves as protection. That's what plasma does. That's what the coma is. Mm-hmm. It's just a double layer. And there's, if you didn't see it with a coma tail behind it, you would think of it just as a layer that's trying to electrically isolate that sphere. But as electrons come close, their ions are getting ripped off and they're going the opposite direction. This creates this illusion of fire, which is an electrical reaction, not chemical. It's just an electrical version. Now, this coma, there could be multiple layers actually going around the same craft. Just we see with the Sapphire project that occasionally those will happen. But these are all there just to hold the potential between these two plates in what's called the electric field. And this electric field, of course, can support, this is what a capacitor is. So you have the area of the rock. And then, of course, it has so much potential between these 2 points. Once you know that potential then and know the area, you can get the capacitance, and then you can start calculating the coulombs and whatever and all that kind of shit. So when you get to that point, you understand how much coulombs this has. It's the coulombs that are allowed to do energy, and each coulomb represents 1 voltage potential at 1 amp. So basically 1 joule, and you start putting these together and you realize how big an explosion this could be.
Yes, but it still implies an actual charge difference between the two objects.
Yes, that's why it doesn't happen when every single thing enters into it. An asteroid, for example, is something that orbits generally inside of the asteroid belt of the sun. So it's between 1 and 2 AUs at most, usually. So it's going to be relatively balanced to us. The more it's different for us, the more the potential is going to be as it gets closer and closer to the Earth. And I mean, it's the same balance as the sun's potential at this point, which is about 600 or so volts difference, if it's relatively balanced for that point. Now, if it's way out past Pluto most of the time, that potential is vastly different than close up to the anode of the sun, if you get my meaning. So that's what we're talking about. So when a comet comes from there and that thing hits the Earth, it's going to be much larger an explosion. Notice the asteroid that came in was only blowing down windows, which is a big enough bang, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't 20 or 30 nuclear megatons, And this is where the potential is, and obviously the potential out there is gathered by just simply sitting out there. Over time, you bleed out your charge to become balanced to the space around you, and that's all I'm talking about. So,
right. And what does that do to that object when it lost all its charge out there? Does that influence gravity?
Well, that's the argument, isn't it? We don't know. I mean, if I'm a betting man, I'd say yes.
Or how heavy we can measure it, how the mass, if you will.
And that steps right into Wal Thornhill's issue, but he noticed that these comets tend to be not made of snow. That alone seems to indicate, am I not using my lying eyes? I'm looking at a rock in space. It looks like any other asteroid, and if I'm looking at it that way, and it says by such size that it should have a mass like this, well then something's either wrong with our calculations, because goddammit, it's a rock.
Well, I'm so, totally agreeing there, because
I just don't know.
This is the mainstream outlet like ESA, NASA, etc. They're sending these probes in Japan and whatnot to all these asteroids out there or comets. They keep telling us they're dirty snowballs. And every image we see and every report we get, it's a big fucking mountain floating out around over there. So yeah, there's something wrong. So I'm trying to get to that, right?
Oh, I'm with you. I just don't know how else to say it except for either you agree or you don't, because at the moment, if you say it strictly with, it's one of those problems that basically says, our fundamental laws of nature might be askew. We might be wrong here. and we're doing something wrong because our math says this, but we tried digging into it and it's a rock. What gives? And no one really, even though it's obvious to us, because we have the benefit of someone else pointing it out.
It's obvious to everyone. Just look at the pictures. There are rocks that are floating out there.
But they
every
trust
time
the
we
mass
go there.
calculation. It's the same thing as we trust with Jupiter is, this dense and has a specific gravity of this much.
So I'm doing the math here with this weighing equipment there, and it says mouse. And I look up and I see an elephant. And I look at my calculation again. Nope, must be a mouse. Mouse.
I'm entirely with you. That's a big problem, and I don't see them acknowledging it anytime soon. It's probably and we know we've run into this problem several times. We run into it with the sun. The sun is made of hydrogen. It has a surface because we can see it.
It's a nuclear reactor.
But it doesn't matter. It's still made of hydrogen, and you're like,
on the outside,
it's a rock. Or something. It's covered in something. It has a surface, And the same thing is we think that Jupiter and Saturn is so light it can float in water. It's made of that light of gas, but we know it must have a surface. And just like they did it with Juno when they sent the probe there, they go and look at Jupiter. Jupiter has a surface, 300 miles down below the clouds. Well,
only 300 miles.
Yeah, only. That's not much.
No.
So that means it's a big friggin' rock, and it should weigh a lot more. Yes. It should be weighing, it should be just pulling in. So why doesn't it? And if that's the case,
this is where this fundamental,
the fundamental problem of nature of reality. Yeah.
Yeah. But the problem why you can't go there is it topples the whole structure.
Yes. And us poking holes.
Or maybe, I would argue, fortunately, So.
But it's a question that cannot go unanswered. And that's why I am strongly of the opinion that all things being equal, if we look at all the balls that we see in the sky, and we look at every single one of them without clouds, just look at the moons and stuff. All the moons are relatively made out of the same stuff. All the asteroids are relatively made out of the same stuff, with some minor exceptions, like one's a more metallic, one's not, or whatever. So,
you're talking malachite, silicates, etc., etc., etc.
If that's the case, then all the planets should be the same way, is what I'm thinking. All the planets and stars should probably be made of the same material. That's just an idea, but it seems the most likely, and that's why I'm leaning towards that until we find out for sure.
Yeah, in Michigan.
Meteorites. There's all sorts of strange exotic metals.
Well, yeah, but they're still big rocks.
Why is there so much metal? Why is there so much metal in them? Typically, is it because those ones that fall and they don't burn?
No.
It burns away the rest of the stuff.
I'd like to jump in there.
I think because
these rocks are floating around. Every now and then they get zapped. Every time they get zapped, you get the chance of more and more heavier elements due to fusion effects, right?
I would say yes. Or they could be parts of a planet, like, for example, if you found an iron particle, I would think that the sun is quite possibly high in iron. It could be part of the sun blown off, or part of the core of a planet that was once exploded. And I'm okay with those type of explanations at the moment. We don't have anything better.
There's a whole lot to be discovered still, and this is why I pursue it, because there's a lot to be discovered. I'm pretty sure there things we don't even anticipate yet.
I'm convinced that electric comet will lead to a revision of the sun and the planets in the idea of mass. I'm not sure how, but it seems obvious to me that charge plays a role. It seems to be inverse.
Yes,
in some way. I don't understand why it's inverse. That's a problem that bothers me, because we notice that highly charged objects like Saturn, like Jupiter, like comets, and like the sun all seem to be light. Why are we heavy? I mean, that's one of the reasons why we have to have an iron core, because of our apparent mass around the sun, and our apparent size tells us this is how much it should be.
Maybe we just have highly charged. I don't know, but
I don't know either.
I think we talked about iron and the importance of iron before, but as far as it being in blood and hemoglobin, or
and then the magnesium with the
Apples.
plants, and then the same structure for the energy transport. This is a strong one. I mean, the one that I think is, I've seen this now kind of up close and personal. It's like the one that I think that's compelling that you can get the door to open is, and it's what Neil's expertise is in, as well as Robert's, and it's the electric geology.
I think it's
that's the thing of the future. Absolutely.
When you look at this exact thing that you're looking at here, you might say that's a bunch of random, but could you pause it? Or back it up and pause it for a second? I just want to show you what I mean.
If you look at that was 2 polygonal craters right side. That was awesome.
But we can go into that. But if you look at that right there, you might think that's a random distribution of pitting. Okay, but if you really look at it carefully, it's not. Look at all of the craters that are on top of the rings of other craters. And if you do that alone, you know that there has to be a pattern. This is why when you look at a surface, you can say that was made by an artist because he didn't do it right. If you know it's made by electricity, it looks like this. That's exactly what it looks like, and only like that. And that is
always. Nuh-uh. I'm totally playing.
In general, the crater on the rims of the high points break by something, and that starts another crater. That's a very unique type of patterning. It's not something that occurs just by a random distribution.
It looks like Apollonian gaskets almost.
Mm-hmm. I'm seeing those in there.
But anyway, this is just a preponderance.
This is where you start doing these. That's why Dave is very hard to get a hold of, by the way. But like that full circle. He's like to me. It's like we've almost got a full circle. He gets it closer even. To get the whole pipeline of having something being able to do just within our group something formal.
You can hit play again. I just wanted to let you guys see what I mean by when you see something like this, you can see. Now, it doesn't mean that some of these aren't actual crater hits, but from what we're seeing, a lot of them seem to be very electrical, and they respond in the exact same nature as, going for the high point right on the rim that was just made. Yeah, you do that. Or something like this, which is impossible, or something like this, which is impossible.
That's not how things. When you can see something very similar when you use electric discharge to this type of pitting, right?
Oh yes.
But whenever you have a projectile that hits another other thing, it doesn't do this. It doesn't do this morphology. It's like a small thing hitting like they've been proposing forever,
like a bullet. Yeah,
it doesn't make that. It doesn't make this shape.
No, it doesn't. And if we were remotely intelligent, we would look at things like the Talvishar volcano that we looked at, or those cryovolcanoes on Enceladus or whatever it is that are popping out, and we see how the material comes up and rains back down. It's changing the landscape right there in slow motion, and we're not acknowledging it. That's our own fault. That's just us being ignorant, I think, it's in many ways. And to be fair, though, that they don't see it as what we see it as, and so they don't understand what they're looking at. And
right. The model hasn't been proposed loudly enough, I think.
Well, and this is one of those things.
This is part of the EU
obviously, that is not part of plasma cosmology that I think is the strongest evidence for EU. Right there, as we're talking about this geology, and especially since the moon is readily observable, we can say, and every time we go to a new planet, we see the same type of things. It's clear that this is an avenue for the electric universe. Plasma cosmology, different ballgame. Looking at something on the astrophysical change. We were arguing about this before. I'm actually editing that video now, so I'm enjoying the argument.
Sure. Yeah, this stuff. Though, the interesting thing that kind of ties all these things together, interestingly, is that with the math stuff is that his model by refuting the real number system as a continuum, it looks it's all about harmonic analysis, which you see here ultimately.
Well, that's literally what shockwaves
to me.
do.
Clear as day. Clear as day there. Right?
Yeah, and when we look at Dave's work before, when we saw these little things jump out across the landscape of the clay ball, and you see how it each one of those, although we didn't give it credit, the thing that's different about the Earth is that it has a speed of sound, and the air is relatively thick. So we get shock waves. You don't get shock waves on the moon. You don't get shock waves on Mars, really, because Mars has very thin atmospheres. But you certainly get it here, and some of these are amazing versions of shock waves that would have to have been because of something either heading into the Earth at a certain point, like the footprint of a prominence, like that, or you'd have something running across the landscape and then blasting in a valley, shoving material left and right. So that's another mechanism. But both of those have been shown right there in
permission
Dave's
to throw
work.
in an opinion there.
Feel free.
Just an opinion, okay? Just to be clear there. I think it literally comes from underneath our feet. It gets probably discharged throughout the water, the oceans, and where it touches the land, it starts eating away, finding its way to the highest point through the so-called rivers of plasma. That's what ate away a large chunk of the Southwest, I believe, and as a result is the Grand Canyon.
Well,
that's the path.
That's one of them, yeah. But I'm only. I mean, like I said
it's
before,
not just there, but
no.
So,
Clearly, no. In fact, that strike on the American Southwest affected the entire continent. Clearly, it was huge,
and it also comes from the ridges. Everywhere there are fault lines. It comes from the fault lines. And that's where you get those buttresses that you just showed, those triangular shapes.
Makes sense. That would happen there too.
Yeah. Yes. There are always fault lines there, always. And then from the fault lines, on the sides, you get the mountains. And on the mountains, you get the buttresses. And it's like a repeating thing, a repetitive thing. Every now and then the thing goes haywire and it makes another jump, another growth spurt, if you will. Another discharge.
Well, the fault lines would be an easy connection point to a place that could deliver more charge for it, like more basaltic rock, somewhere closer to that. I can picture that. Same thing with
yes, they're usually more deep material, if you will. Yes, so they're more connected to the deeper material already.
Yes,
but not just that. Water can seep in there, conductive again, and they tend to be lower. It comes from below. It's as if it comes from the center of the Earth. I'm not saying the center, but from underneath our feet, eating its way outwards.
Well, yeah, but I just described
what geology.
I just described this to you when we were just talking a moment ago about the layers, the capacitive layers, and then what would happen if something touches it. That's the same thing as what I'm referring to. Okay, but Buddy was having fun on there. But anyway, that's what I meant. We're seeing a version of that same effect, except occurring on the Earth, and the breakdown is occurring not because. Probably because of interlopers that would have affected a large swath of area, like another planet nearby. Probably not a CME. Probably nothing like that. It would have to be something that only affected that particular area. But just a thought, though. I'm trying to deduce. I mean, there's a lot of talk about Venus, for example, being the culprit in that particular regard. But you'd have to ask the Velikovsky scholars. I'm not that guy. So.
When is Julian on? Because, I'd like to hear his story.
I'm going to bug him right now. Yeah. Where are you, bugger?
Because there must have been so many instances that this happened all over the Earth. So, otherwise you would see more lopsided Earth or more like Mars or something, one side affected. But it's literally all over the Earth, everywhere. from the poles to the deserts to the equator, everywhere.
I don't think it all happened at the same time, though, obviously.
No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, it's more
it
like...
must have happened all at once, one time, like, boom, the Earth is made, type of thing. That must have happened.
Well, interlopers or planets could definitely be a cause. I'm not saying it's not a cause for something like this to happen, but in my mind there must be something else too. I don't know what that could be, but
well, it's
because the mountain forming is so uniform all over the Earth, right? Otherwise, you would have more localized effects. That's kind of what I would imagine. If it were just a planet close by, influencing a certain site, just a planet close by, in my mind, would affect all the fracture zones and therefore the entire Earth. Just make the Earth go haywire.
Well, actually, that's a story. I mean, a lot of people talk about the times that the Earth changes, and goes through these type of events. I can envision that there are some pretty nasty. It could have been possibly a worldwide event, and we got to understand too that if there was, for example, if we just suddenly the sun just suddenly increased in charge really rapidly, it would shrink our magnetosphere and ionosphere and everything much closer to the Earth. During that time it shrunk, it would induce loops to come out of that. And those loops would, because of changing magnetic field, would induce these things, which could cause loops to pull material from one spot to another, which seem to be some of the descriptions of like these loops, green loops and dragons jumping through the skies and so forth from different parts of the world. Well, that's has nothing to do at all with an interloper, but could very well have been could have been an interloper because of the situation. But remember, it's not what we're seeing is it's going to be chaotic. It's going to have a pattern which we're noting, and this is what we're seeing on the landscapes and what Garrett Hill's seeing and other people are seeing. But it doesn't mean that that we know all of the causes for every these. This is the problem, of course.
Right. In my mind, there can be multiple, and there probably are multiple causes.
I think so. Yeah.
To that result in the same effect, meaning Earth going haywire, right? And that could be a CME, that could be a big asteroid, it could be the Venus coming close, or whatever.
It could have been one of those cycles where Jim talks about, where the sun enters into another part of the solar current, so to speak, and then we have an influx of power.
But they all disturb the electric balance.
Yes,
and
that's true.
And that's what we're talking about. So,
and there's a lot more energy there than people think. It's just literally sitting there hovering at just imagine the Earth. If you look at all the lightning bolts, it's crackling. It's like a Van de Graaff generator. It's just crackling, waiting for a chance to unload. It's just give me an outlet, like give me a tall mountain, bring something close, I'll zap it. I swear to God. And that's what it's sitting there like. It wants to do it. I mean, that's what electricity wants to do. It wants to ground out. So
it's called potential.
Exactly. Well, this is what I mean. We think that we live on. No. There's no potential beneath our feet. There's no energy there. Just heat. Nothing weird.
Well, we are part of that. We are part of that balanced system, right? We are part of that higher energy, if you will, in relation to the comet, at least. But we would be less charged, probably, in relation to the sun. I'm assuming here.
Well, I think that you're generally right. And seeing things like this, and like I said, if we this can look like Mars. He's comparing it to Mars in a very direct way. It's when you start adding it, when we look at the Earth, we see these buttresses because these currents running across the surface are going to create supernaturally powerful shock waves. And of course, the air has to explode out of the way because it's just been superheated. And it's going to blast material in as it builds up against things and wears down mountains that were there before relatively instantly. Like this moving material everywhere would happen. Like, could you imagine a rock moving across the surface of the Earth while you're sitting there, or a mountain shrinking just like this, with dust flying off of it? We just not able to comprehend what that looks like. So pillars of fire, as we're talking about. But he's doing it. See, this is where we're at the regular Earth potential, because you can see how small the currents are, how narrow they are. So we know he's doing this at atmospheric potential. But if he lowered the pressure, we'd see it look, like it does in Jacob Gabel's work and stuff. Anyway, just
very cool,
wonderful stuff.
Yeah.
I love actually that Andy Hall has managed to make that connection, because we're having a mechanical engineer there to describe our landscapes, differently, helps, because I noted that they were weird, but I never noticed how weird they actually were until he's like, no, mathematically these are how they work, and you're like, holy crap. This is what I like when I see this stuff. People are putting this together, and Garrett Hill is one of the few people that can work in DC at high voltage, which is nice.
He's out here, right?
Yeah, he's in Oregon.
Oregon, right? Okay, should definitely get him on.